Hi, welcome back to the Busy Corner. This is lesson 29. Today I'm going to show you, if you'd really want to, how to make this thing I'm wearing. Now, this is called Shaker Rib Great Cowl, and it's a burnout pattern. It originally called for 3 balls, and I used 2 3/4 because it turned out one of my balls was smaller than the other. I can't recommend this pattern or this yarn particularly. For one thing, it separates badly. In fact, when I ended it, I just kind of split the plies. It's a 4-ply and it kind of untwists on its own, and you can see how fuzzy, maybe, I don't know if you can tell how fuzzy this is already. In the pattern picture, this is deceiving because this isn't really shaker, but I wanted to show you how to do a shaker rib, and there's lots of ways of doing it. Some people call it shaker stitch, some people call it fisherman's rib. There's another very cute pattern in the Big Knit Love book, and she uses 2 colors to do the shaker rib, and she does it 2 ways, and she winds up with a really cute cowl or a long scarf. But the point being, the pattern is the same for each one. But first of all, let me take this off. So this was made, like I say, on smaller needles than the pattern called for, but you can't make it like she has in the picture. You can't really make it stay that way. It would end up having to be a capelet. So I'm not real crazy about this. I'm not crazy about the yarn. I was going to make another one, but I'm going to take the yarn back. So, but let's move on, because the real purpose of this whole thing was to show you shaker stitch. There's other ways of doing shaker stitch, but the one in this particular pattern, the burnout pattern, and the one for the scarf in Big Knit Love, and this is actually a really good book, so I would recommend this. I think I got this on Amazon, but there's a lot of good ideas, and she has a really good way of holding your needles to do continental stitch. But the point being is, this is a simple way for us particularly. Now, when she starts her pattern, she starts it on what she says the wrong side, which is with a knit row. And so when you do your shaker stitch, you're going to end up with one side, and this is considered the right side of the fabric. And this is what's considered the wrong side. But it's considered a reversible fabric. And you can see that it's dense, but also there's a stretch to it. And it makes cute scarves, you can make sweaters, blah, blah, blah. So on the knitting needles, this is how it comes out. Now, because she starts the pattern, she calls it wrong side. When you do it on the stationary rods, you're going to wind up with the right side of the fabric facing out, and the wrong side of the fabric facing in, because she does the knit row first. So, on her pattern in the book, you knit 1 row, and then for your second row, which is the right side of the work, you purl 1, then knit 1 below. Well, on this other pattern, which is for circular needles, and this was my whole purpose in making that cowl thing, was I wanted to show you how to do it on the circular needles. The first instruction, round 1, is knit. The second round is knit 1, purl 1 below. You realize that that second round is the reversal of the second round in Big Knit Love, which is exactly what we do on the stationary rods. So, just a little FYI. So I'm going to show you how to do it on the circular needles, because it's going to show us a couple things. So again, this pattern was for circular needles, so the first round is to knit, and the second round, knit 1, purl 1 below. So, by the way, if you've made your little hoops, it's a good idea when you have your extra tubing to go ahead and make yourself a small one if you don't have one already. This is a good way for you to test a pattern, because otherwise you can't really do a sampler on the big hoop. You couldn't join it. So you can see that that's what I did here. And if you do it on the circular needles, what you're going to find, whether you do it on circular knitting needles or do it on the hoop, you're going to find the wrong side is facing down, if you will, when you have the piece, when you're holding the hoop like this or holding the circular needles like that. So, to do anything, to do the shaker stitch on this circular needles then, you're going to, you can see what I've done, by the way. This is my 19, and this pattern, the burnout pattern, called for US 35s with 1 strand of the Mega Bulky, and she calls for 2 strands, also US 35s. But it was so open you couldn't even see the stitch, so I made it once already, and then I tore it all out and made it again on this 19. Now you'll notice I took a little bit of Teflon tape and I wound it around the top where I put them on. Not where I take them off, but where I put them on. And when you go, if you find that you have, especially with that yarn, it just snagged on everything, even my dry skin on my hands. So take a roll of Teflon tape if you have any kind of burrs on the top of your circular needles. And what you want to do with that is take it so that it's lying like this and lay it over the end and hold it there with your finger and wrap it around. And if you hold it this way, it's easier to get it good and tight. Of course, it's not going to do it because I'm showing it for the camera. And sort of unwind it and pull it at the same time. And when you get around, you can just pull, push and pull. And that will cover up all your little snags, and it'll stay the whole time you're knitting. I had that same piece of tape on there to do this scarf twice. So anyway, when you're doing something like this, you want to make sure you're casting on loosely. And here's a little trick. If you're casting on, we're just going to put on 2 more stitches. By the way, if you want to do the shaker on the stationary rods or straight knitting needles, you need an odd number of stitches. To do it on the circular needles, you need to put on an even number. So, I've already forgotten what I had on there. If it was 32, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28. There's 30 on here. The pattern called for 36. So you could do it on smaller needles, put on fewer stitches. So, again, when you go to cast on and you have your thumb, your tail, wrap around your thumb and put that over your rod or your end of your hoop and bring your working yarn then around the hoop, bring this back over, just pull on the tail. That'll tighten it up there, and then you can put it up next to the pipe, if that makes sense. So you're making it looser. You want to make sure that those easily move on there. Now, to do shaker stitch, the way both of these patterns describe, and by the way, let's get our little mat first, and I'm going to turn my back more to the camera. Once you get more adept at knitting on your circular needle, you want to maybe start like this till you get more used to what a stitch looks like. And again, when you start, if you remember back to when we started the hats, it looks better. By the way, you need something to make a stitch marker. You can just use a contrasting piece of yarn. So put it over your end of your pipe and take your 2, I should have made myself a little bit longer tail, but this is just for demonstration. So take your stitch off. You're going to knit the first round and use both the tail and working yarn to make your first stitch. And it will make a fuller look. Now, you notice here's my tail and working yarn coming off this stitch. And I'm putting it underneath my stitch. Now, you don't pipe it in the same way you do stationary rods. If I were doing stationary rods, I'd pipe it like this. But we're working in the round now, and we are joining it. And so imagine if this stitch were just coming off and following it like this, and you have to make this one look the same way. So you flip it like this, and then snug that up, and now you can drop. I would normally go 2, but that's going to make the next round bulky. So now you can knit your first row. Now, you take the stitch off, lay it over your working yarn, pull your working yarn up, but put it on like this. If you did it this way on the stationary rods, you would twist your stitch, but it doesn't work out that way on the circular knitting hoop. So you're going to pull the stitch up and pipe it like so, and you're going to keep working around. And once you get better at recognizing what you need to do, then you can toss your doodah. You know, might want to make a small thing like a cowl, but even that particular cowl got so heavy, I could not hold it like this. It just got to be uncomfortable, and I just turned it like this. But you have to kind of think of it sideways. But once you get the hang of it, and you can do this any number of ways, but if you want to hold the yarn in your left hand and take the stitch off, bring it through so the loop looks like this, and pipe it in that fashion. Now you don't have to have a sticky mat. It's a little tricky. You got to kind of think of it upside down, or I guess sideways is really the way to think of it. But you notice that with each stitch, and sitting at putting on, normally we would put, if we were on the regular rods and working this like rods, we would be putting it on like this, but not when we do the circular. Not when we're joining them. That's the key. And you just want to take it, make it, flip it on, and loop, push the loop through that way. And you knit the whole first round. You keep working your stitches around. I was surprised how much easier it was to knit on this hoop than it was circular knitting needles. I never did get it to come out right, that cowl on circular knitting needles. Once my tips fell off, I lost all my stitches. So I like this a lot better. I'm going a little faster here, so I hope you're getting that. So if you just hold your yarn out and lay your stitch over, again, these are front stitches, knit stitches, and you're pulling this stitch up. This is your new stitch. But instead of piping it like this, like we were doing stationary rods, we flip it this way. And you can kind of imagine these stitches just marching to the next. If they were marching in a row, they would just keep facing the same direction, if you think of it that way. You can see that I'm just, from time to time they'll get a little tight, and you want to make sure when you started this that all your cast on row is facing one direction. That's another benefit to this. If you've ever used circular knitting needles, it's really easy to twist that first row accidentally. If this feels a little rough, it's not usually a problem when it's coming off. It's when you're putting it on that's a problem. Okay, so now we're back to our stitch counter. Now we've knit our first round, so take your stitch marker and move it to the right from the left. And the second part of this pattern is knit one. Whoops. But remember, almost forgot, when we joined that first stitch, we used both the tail and the working yarn, so remember there's two stitches there. What alerted me was I went to take this off and it felt stuck. So don't forget that you have those two stitches together. So knit the first stitch, but remember that's just that one we doubled. Now, for the second stitch, we want to purl one below. So take your stitch off and look at it, and you will see the stitch that was on the pipe is in your fingers, and this is the stitch below. And all we have to do to purl one below is take our working yarn, and if you want to, put your finger through this stitch. This is where we're going to knit through, right here. And to purl one, you know, we have to go through the back, or in this case, I guess you could almost say it was the top. So put your finger there into that stitch and bring the yarn through so that it looks like this, and pipe it just like that. Now, you can see that I have two stitches. By doing that, I've basically combined the stitch that was on the pipe and the stitch below it into one, and that's what elongates the stitch. Now, the next stitch is a knit stitch, and it's this first row that you have to be careful about your count. So there's our knit stitch. And the next one, again, is purl one below. Now, you can do this a couple different ways if you're doing it sideways like I am. But you could just take your yarn up here like we always do to purl. Now take your stitch off. Now, you see that we don't knit into the stitch that was on the pipe. We want to knit below into this one. So you can even take your finger in there and push your yarn through and then pipe it just like that. Snug it up. You can see, again, 2 stitches. So if you lose track of where you're at, look to see how many stitches. You can see I only have 1 stitch around this new loop where the working yarn is coming through, and I know that that was a knit stitch, not a knit one below, or in this case purl one below. So move your stitches around from time to time. Obviously got to do that. So now I know I need to purl one below. Take your stitch off. You can have your yarn above here if you want to start, and there's where I have to purl. And again, we're going in the back. If I were knitting one below, all I'd have to do is put the yarn underneath, but in this case I'm not, because I'm on these circular hoop. Now you can see I have 2 stitches around there, so that's where I combine the stitch. Knit one, purl one below. Knit one, purl one below. You can kind of pull them if you want to combine them. It's going to look funny when you take that stitch off, especially that other yarn, the way it was. And they're going to kind of back up on there, so at some point you gotta... And if they're hard to move around your pipe, you're pulling too hard. I have a tendency to pull it too hard. Now, see, I've already forgotten. What did I do last? Here, put this back up so you don't get confused. And look at your stitch. Well, I can see if I pull up on this, I only have 1. And you can go back and see 2. Later on, you'll be able to see those lines, but right now that's hard to see. So now I know I need to purl one below. Take your stitch off. You want to go into the stitch below that right there. So you can put your finger through and push the yarn through if you want. So there's the working yarn coming off this way, and it gets piped just like this. Knit one, again, there's where you want to go through. Purl one below, pipe it. Knit one, purl one below. Now, you would do that through that whole round, and as you go along, again, you're going to keep moving your stitches around. When you get to the end of that row, well, here, let's just go the whole row. So we know, here, look at this. I can see when I pull up, especially on my working yarn, I can see I have 2 stitches there. I have to knit one. Let's go ahead and finish this row. Purl one below. Now, I'm going to turn my chair so that you can see this then, like I'm seeing it. Now that I have the hoop here, which is a little different than you're used to looking at it from here, but it's much easier to hold. It just seams backwards to do it. So I see that I have 2 pieces of yarn here, so that was a purl one below. So now I'm holding my yarn this way. I'm taking my stitch off. I'm putting it over the working yarn, like so. I'm taking my hand to pull up the new stitch, and I'm piping it. Now, if you want to, you can switch the hand that holds the yarn, and I think this is easier, but you know, if you're using multiple strands, you risk dropping one. Here's your stitch that you need to go through where my finger is. Now, push the yarn through so that it looks like this, and now just turn it and pipe it. Don't turn it over, and now knit. Bring your yarn back over here. There's other ways of doing it too, and you decide what's more comfortable. But this is much easier to do than trying to hold it straight on, but it's just the opposite of what we're used to looking. So I know that that was a knit stitch. There's only 1 loop of yarn on there. So pull this out and you get a better look at where you need to be. And you need to go right in here. And then turn it and pipe it just like that. And while the yarn is over here, go ahead and knit one. Bring the yarn above or to the right and purl one below. And pipe it. Knit one. Take your next stitch off. There's where I need to be. Put the yarn through, bring it out, pipe it. Knit one more. Pipe it. Oops, running out of space here. Alright, bring your yarn back to the right, which is, if you were looking at it this way, it'd be above, just like we always do back stitches or purl stitches. Take your stitch off. There's where you need to be. And push the yarn right through there. I use my thumb just to push it through. And then, let me move my hand. See, it looks like that. And then you're just putting it on, like so. And while your yarn's there, knit your stitch. It's going to look like this before turn it. Let's go back to our little, oh, and don't forget when you're using the circular tubular knitter, the knitting hoop, you're going to need to use your stitch counter because it's not as easy to keep track as when you're doing the rods. Now, I'm going to show you one more thing here using our little sample piece, and I'm going to show you how to do a cast off and to fix the end because you're going to need to add a stitch. So I've marked my first stitch that I'm going to make, and I'm going to cast off using knit stitches. So it'll be a little harder to see. Can you see there, Joe? So make sure you have your working yarn and not your tail, and you're going to knit one and pipe it. I'll try to hold it up a little higher. Does that work?
Yeah.
Okay, now take your stitch off and knit a second, pipe it, then take the stitch you made first and pull it over the second stitch you made. Now, take your yarn, knit a stitch, take the first stitch off and pass over the second. Knit one, pass over. Knit one, pass over, move your stitches around. You'll have just one here on the top of this right side. Knit one, pass over, knit two, pass over. You may have to hold that down a bit with your fingers as you are passing that stitch over. Knit one, pass over, and you can see that even though you have one here, you can still, your stitches will still reach around the circle. Bring your, pass over your stitch, knit one, pass over, knit one, pass over. I had more stitches on here than I realized. Thought this would go faster. Alright, pass over. That's alright. It's kind of awkward to do it with it way out there. I'm trying to put it where the camera can see it. If you're making an afghan or a scarf or something, you're going to want to make sure that you do this loosely. If it's a hat, you probably want to be tighter about it. Depends on how much stretch there's going to be in the garment, so consider that. Alright, I just have a few left here. Should have got out my sticky mat for this little guy. Hope that's showing up. Joe, can you see that?
I'm not sure.
Alright, well, we'll find out.
We'll find out.
When I review this, we'll find out. I probably should have done this on the big one, but it's harder to find the cast off.
My screen is only a ½ an inch long.
Oh, that's right. Alright, well, let's just hope. This is one of my ugly duckling hoops. You notice I keep all these ugly ducklings. Now, you're down to your last stitch. Pass over. Now, you have one stitch remaining, and what you want to do, what you want to do is you can go ahead and take your stitch marker off and your hoop, and you want to pull this up. This is your, here's your working yarn, and go ahead and leave yourself a good amount of tail, maybe 8 inches or so, and cut your yarn. Now, hold. Here's your cut, so hold this stitch, but pull the working yarn out, and you're done with that, so just toss it aside. Now, this is the wrong side, and you'd really like to do this through the good side, so I would turn it inside out now. This is actually the side, your right side of the garment, and you have your tail, and now you need a tapestry needle, and I like these big fat ones, so stick your tapestry needle through there. And go back, you put a stitch marker through where you made your first cast off stitch. And what you're going to do, you can see that this level is not the same. Plus you have this elongated area. What you're going to do is join this so that you have a more invisible, otherwise it would look like, let me get that tail through there so we're not looking at that. And you can see what I'm talking about. Otherwise, you'd have this, and that's not very attractive. And I saw this on a site called Knit Freedom, and she has a very good video of this, and it's very close up. So I put this stitch marker there so I would know what my first stitch was. So take that and put that aside. And now, that was your first cast off stitch. And you're going to take your tail now, and you're going to go under that V from front to back. So that's why I turned it inside out, and go underneath the whole V, and you're going to create your own little V of knitting, which is going to kind of seal this up. Now, go back and look where you ended this last stitch, this last cast off stitch, and go in the middle between the V's, so right through here. And then when you pull that up, it will more or less create, doesn't want to because I cast that one off too loose. You can see that first stitch I cast off a little loose, but if you go and look at her video, she actually did a better job than I did. See how I left that first stitch is a little loose. If you do it correctly, it won't look like that. And then bring it to the back, because you really would like that to be the same size. And I can't go in that other stitch now, but you can see that basically what happens is you create this. If I'd have made this tighter, it would look better. And that makes those edges level now. So make sure when you do that, you're not leaving that so loose. And then you can weave this in if the yarn were finer, or you can weave it in and tie a knot. But that will join the top edge of your stitching. If I'd have made that tighter, it would have looked better. So you get the idea. And then you can weave it in and you're finished. So that's what you have to do when you're knitting in the round. You have to create that last stitch there. And again, go to Knit Freedom because she does a better job of it on a smaller piece of knitting. Looks better. And the last thing I'm going to show you, if we have time, do we have time? Is, so you saw what happened with the shaker stitch for the knitting hoop. So now, let's go back to this just for a moment. So on her pattern in the Big Knit Love book, she, again, starts the pattern on the wrong side. She knits a row, but she calls it the wrong side. Now, I still started it on the right. That means every time I'm on my right side, I knit a row. Okay? So I don't even really need the stitch counter unless I just wanted to keep track. So we're going to go ahead, since I'm on my right, and I'm going to knit a row, just like usual. So that I can get back here to the left side. Now, her directions for her shaker stitch are row 2, purl 1, knit 1 below. Well, you know what we just did on the knitting hoop. We did the opposite of that, just like we have to do on the rods. So I am not going to purl 1, knit 1 below. I'm going to knit 1, purl 1 below. Get it? So I have to reverse both the purl to a knit, and I have to reverse the knit 1 below to the purl 1 below. Just what we just did. So now I'm going to knit, and I'm going to purl 1 below. So take your yarn up, make sure there's enough slack on it, take your stitch off. Now, is that showing up, Joe? Mm-hmm. So here is the stitch. I just took off the pipe. It's in my fingers. But where I want to go is right in here. And take your yarn, whoop, let's put that guy back on. Take your yarn, lay it back, lay it over your stitch. Pull it through and put it on. Now, knit 1. Now we're going to purl 1 below. Just take your yarn up, take your stitch off, and you can see, notice that where I purled 1 below, you can see those 2 bars. That's another indication when you take that stitch off that you're putting it in the right place. Of course, you're not going to knit in the top stitch. You're going to knit in the one below. Lay your yarn over, push it through, knit 1, purl 1 below, take it off, and again, every time you take it off to purl 1 below or knit 1 below, if you were doing it the other direction, you would see those bars. You're going to go in here, and you can lay it over and hook it with your finger if you want. Now we'll purl 1 below again. Take it off. Look for those bars so you know you're in the right place. It's a good habit. It'll help give you some reference so you don't make a mistake. Because it's hard to undo these if you goof up. And now you can just do that with your finger. Just hook it and bring it through. And you can see when you go to take off your knit stitch, that's where all your knit stitches are. You don't see the bars. Take it off. You see the bar up there where the 2 yarns, where you make 2 stitches into one. And just come in here. That's where you want to be. You can lay your yarn over and push if you want, or just hook it. And then your last one is a knit. And if you do anything on your stationary rods, if you do the shaker stitch on your stationary rods, you want to make sure you put on an odd number of stitches, just like you would do straight knitting needles. And if you're knitting in the round, use an even number. And again, when you are knitting, then this is the good side, if you will, of shaker stitch. And then this is considered the wrong side, and it produces a beautiful, dense, stretchy fabric that's reversible and lies flat. And that's how you do shaker stitch. Thanks for watching.